Welcome, everyone. Today we're joined by a very special guest from the Good Shepherd Collective that's based in the West Bank. And we're joined today by Ameed. Thank you so much for joining again. And please introduce yourself to everyone.
Thank you so much, Matthew, for having me over. My name is Ameed Faleh. I live in the West Bank. I'm a student of political science and economics at Al-Quds University, and I'm very glad to be here. I've been a member of the Good Shepherd Collective since February of this year, and it's been both an enlightening and humbling experience to just be part of this collective, and I'm very glad to be here speaking on its behalf.
We're very glad to have you. Thank you so much for your time again. With everything going on, it's very difficult, I'm sure, to just kind of continue with everything going on. So I'd like to get get started on the talking about you as a collective and your collective that you represent. So if you could tell us more about the work that the Good Shepherd Collective does on the ground in terms of trying to fight back against illegal settlements.
So just for context, the Good Shepherd Collective was formed in 2018, 2019, 2020, around this period, the first nucleus of it, before, it became an official thing. And in 2020, it sort of, coalesced into the Good Shepherd Collective. And it was primarily based, its activities based in Masafri Yatta, which is a hilly region south of Al-Khalil, Hebron, in the West Bank, very south of the West Bank. And it was, and it still is, under threat of, ethnic cleansing and dispossession. So from the get-go, the Good Shepherd Collective's work was on the ground, and it was influenced by why the Good Shepherd Collective was formed. It was influenced by the fact that the NGO framework in Palestine in the West, it's been plagued by agendas that are not realistic, that they are detrimental to the Palestinian cause, that you get donations from XYZ donor or XYZ country, and you have to abide by very strict guidelines of how to speak, how to conduct yourself, what language you use. So the point of the Good Shepherd Collective was to break away from this sort of tightening of activism work, so to speak, and this sort of soft power tactics that the West uses on activists, and regain basically the concept of activism truly. Since then, the Good Shepherd Collective has been active very much on social media, highlighting the Israeli provocations, Israeli ethnic cleansing in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. It created relatively recently a database, highlighting the extent of the genocide in Gaza, how it affects people on the ground in Gaza, because from our point of view, it's not enough to talk about it. You have to also see the numbers for yourself, and to have that sort of database ready, it's important. We've been also engaging in the discourse surrounding decolonization. We have been publishing articles with App Magazine, with Montovice, as a collective, and some of us individually. But for us, publishing individually or as a collective, it's both. It's integral to the work. So if I publish something as Ameed, it's not for myself as Ameed. It's I'm considered part of the collective, and I speak for the collective when I publish something. So this is the idea of the Good Shepherd Collective. It's to sort of be unbounded, be, as maybe in South Africa they would say, become ungovernable. Because the very notion of being governed by decorum, Western decorum, for us, it irks us. And this was the reason for, sort of breaking away and forming the Good Shepherd Collective.
Yeah, I think it's very important, the work that you're doing. And in terms of the data collection as well, it's no small feat, to say the least. There's a lot of data collected on the Good Shepherd Collective. I would recommend everyone to go to their website and look through that, because it's a very recently updated information and statistics on what's happening in Palestine. And especially at a time when the West is collectively trying to legally push back against any war crimes committed by Israel, it's very important to have a database that records all of Israel's Zionist entities' war crimes. So a large part of the work that the collective has done is data collecting. Now, how vital is that in terms of how it could be used at this time, but also in the future?
This is a very important question. It loops back to the fact that for us, when we went about the data collection, we envisioned, we had this idea in mind that speaking about it in the, in the material terms, in the abstract terms, and the theoretical about the genocide in Gaza, it's not enough. People don't know extents of damages unless you show them numbers, especially in the West. So the idea from this was to sort of compile sort of data from different sources, Palestinian sources, especially Palestinian governmental sources. Also lots of NGOs also did work on that front. So we also compiled data from them, World Bank reports, stuff that, goes under the radar, or you just read it on a headline and you just skip it. So to have a place where you can visualize it, where you can see it number by number, all compiled, all collated, was very important to us. And through that process, I can speak at least for myself in this, in the process of, I helped with the data collection. I fact checked the data. I sort of helped with that process. It was very, very, I would say, very different. When you see numbers on a screen, this amount of buildings were destroyed, this amount of people were martyred. It paints a very different, light, even from seeing videos, because over the past year or so, people have become also desensitized to these images. But to have, that database in front of you that's being also constantly updated, it paints a very different picture.
No, it's definitely gives you a different view of the total destruction happening, which I think is very important. And just to kind of reference something that you've mentioned also before regarding NGOs, I think it would be a good segment into my next question, which is part of the work you do as a collective. It's also work on the campaign Defund Racism. So I found this very interesting because it basically aims to uncover how charitable organizations, NGOs from the US, Canada, and elsewhere are basically complicit of funding indigenous erasure. So if you could elaborate on the work being done on the campaign, and basically what's a more reliable way to provide aid to those who really need it, because now there's, whether it's scams, whether it's NGOs that are unreliable, people aren't sure where their money is ending up. And also I would like to add to that, how do the protests in the West have any effect on reality on the ground, if any?
These are all very valid questions. So for us, the Defund Racism campaign was not a campaign launched by the Good Shepherd Collective per se. 150 organizations, Palestinian and based in the West Bank, participated in this. We were part of a report that we wrote on Regavim, which was, the central focus of Defund Racism. Regavim is an Israeli NGO that weaponizes human rights language to evict Palestinians, to ethnically cleanse them, calling their villages as settlements, flipping the table on Palestinians, so to speak, in terms of discourse, calling our villages and, our cities settlements and aiming to ethnically cleanse us. And one important fact about Regavim is that its two founders, one of its founders was Bezalel Smotrich, which is now finance minister. And the other founder was Yehuda Eliyahu, who is also Smotrich's right-hand man in the government. And what has happened post October 7th was a mass confiscation of land. We're talking on a very, very historic level in the West Bank. It has been confiscation after confiscation, and it has reached very much record levels. I read a report yesterday that says basically in the year, like between October 2023 and October 2024, Israel has agreed to build 47, I believe, new outposts, either expanding them or establishing new outposts with a record budget. I forgot the budget, but it was a record budget considering all the past years. And this is not to say that Israel before October 7th or before, the so-called Israeli far right, which I also have an issue with, calling them far right and calling this government extremist. It implies, before Israel was nice to us. But there is something to say about, the view of Smotrich and Ben Gvir about how they want to exterminate us. They are not mincing their words. They are not, they are not waiting for a gradual process of, ethnic cleansing to take place. They want to actively ethnic cleanse. And I think that's the difference between the present moment and all the other moments, is that Israel historically has relied on a slow, gradual, process of elimination. Post October 7th, it has realized that, Palestinians are a danger to our very existence, which we are. We are a danger to Israel's existence as a colonized populace, and it has resorted to the only option it has left in its arsenal, which is ethnic cleansing. We see it in Gaza at a very fast rate, and we're also seeing it in the West Bank in a very slow rate. They are not bombing hospitals, they are not bombing neighborhoods in the West Bank, they're not flattening neighborhoods. But there has been a change in the reality of the West Bank that will be felt for years to come. For example, in my hometown, they stole a very vast hilltop out of nowhere, just because it belonged in area. So there's also, talk about, at least in the Palestinian sense right now, were the Oslo Accords worth it? Because the language they're using right now is that Area C is effectively annexed. You can't build there, you can't do anything there, basically, unless you get, you get permission from the military authorities. Area B is slowly being also swallowed up. Some of Area B is getting converted to Area C in the West Bank, and Area A is just Israel can't take it because it contains large Palestinian demographics, and it would shift the demographic sort of balance. Also, governance, they don't want to bear the cost of governing Palestinians. That's why Oslo happened, because we've become, during and after the First Intifada, we've become too costly to govern as colonized subjects. So the Oslo Accords were an attempt to mitigate that cost. So people are asking, were the Oslo Accords worth it if it legitimized all of what's happening in the West Bank? This has been on people's minds. Lots of questions about a sovereignty in terms of food. People are asking themselves, what if my hometown gets sieged? How will food get in? So we're talking basic biological needs, food, water, safe place. The future is uncertain in the West Bank. I think what's happening also was a wake-up call um, to the people in the West Bank that this sort of life that we're living as colonized subjects, it's very brittle. It can break at any moment. And there's been a change in attitudes. There's been a change of what does the future look like? Everybody had a vision of the future pre-October 7th, how their individual and collective future they want it to be, but now everybody is uncertain. And I think that uncertainty in of itself is healthy. It helps, elevate new forms of thinking, new forms of discourse that have been otherwise, shut down pre-October 7th. With regards, so this is about, it's so the conversation so slowly evolved from defund racism, but I think it's important to, ground this into the new context that emerged in the West Bank. So defund racism sort of aims to explore the dynamics between the regavim and the people behind it, and you organizations in the US. Most of them are also Zionists, but they have tax deductible income. They're not taxed. They give money to Regavim. Regavim uses them to issue surveillance technology on Palestinians, steal their land, lobby the Israeli government to take land from Palestinians. And Smotrich has been a very instrumental part of Regavim. And since now he's finance minister, he has, the free reign to do anything, basically, in the West Bank. So this is what defund racism is. On the other hand, I think it's important that we tie it to, the West, because when we talk about defund racism, it's also, part of the problem is the West, these organizations based in the West. But also part of the problem, in my opinion, and this is not taking away from anyone's, work in the US. I know organizing is hard. I know how difficult it is to be in the belly of the beast and to organize. But there's something to say about the fact that, an organization like Samidun has been outlawed, has been, considered a terrorist entity by the US and Canada. And nobody has protested against this. Early on during the college campus protests, there were several calls by several Palestinians I know, and whom I'm friends with, to basically say, make part of your demands to legalize resistance. Like legalize talking about Hamas, legalize talking about Hezbollah, legalize talking about the PFLP, legalize resistance, not make it, outlawed. And I think, this not being the case on the college campus protests we have seen its effect on Samidun. And if the organizing scene in the West needs, if wants to say sort of relevant, needs to regain some of its credibility, because I think it lost some credibility in the wake of the college campus protests, and the deafening silence afterwards. It was very deafening. They protested. It was amazing. It was an amazing show of solidarity. But then everything went sort of radio silent. At least for I'm a person here. I don't know what goes on, in the US, but for me, everything went radio silent. And I've been trying to follow closely what's happening. So I think there's a problem when an Israeli NGO can lobby the West to give it money to see Palestinian land, but pro-Palestine protesters in the US can't reverse a decision on an organization like Samidun, which does amazing work regarding prisoner rights and just the overall political scene in Palestine. So there's definitely a discrepancy between how how Israel supporters operate and how Palestine supporters operate. And it doesn't hurt to be as, I don't want to say crass, but at least be as, outward with the fact that we need resistance to not be outlawed.
Yeah.
Just be, just as Israel is not outlawed in the US, even though it killed, probably 250,000 Gazans, if not more.
Yeah.
So there's something to be said about that, definitely.
I think you completely right. Just relating to your point, I think this has to do a lot with the fact as well of international law and who it's really constructed for as well at the end of the day. Because if those who are in power can just determine what is legal and illegal, for example, it's legal for Israel to defend itself, apparently, even after 76 years of ethnic cleansing, even after a year of genocide going on in Gaza and slow ethnic cleansing is in the West Bank, not to mention bombing of Yemen, bombing of Syria, bombing of Iran, Lebanon. So the fact that you have this state, this entity, apparently, that can do this without facing any legal repercussions. So what's your view then, as a person living in the West Bank, looking at the system of international law that is set up by these Western powers, preaching humanitarian justice and democracy? I see that and I just, it makes my head boil. So I want your perspective on that and how international law is used as a weapon to suppress those without power.
For me, there's this phrase that says international law failed in Gaza. It failed in Lebanon, but I think it succeeded. I think people who think, put moral determinants on international law, that it's supposed to be good, it's supposed to be, ignore the power dynamics inherent within the formation of international law itself after World War II. It's not a coincidence, that the great powers, the victors sort of met after World War II and tried to and established the UN and established, entities that aimed to prevent another great war. But what it did inadvertently, or not inadvertently, really, was legitimize a power structure where the US is dominant. We're not talking about a multipolar world. We're not living in an era where, we could talk about the benefits of the UN when the Soviet Union was there, because some important resolutions were passed during that time, and it was only possible by the existence of the socialist bloc, the Soviet socialist bloc, such as considering Zionism as a form of racism. But it got revoked also after, Madrid and Oslo, and it was a prerequisite for negotiations that this resolution needs to be shelved. So this is another thing that, the concept of peace brought us, is that we used to have a really good resolution basically outlawing Zionism. Now we don't. So when people talk about dialogue, I always say, what type of dialogue when there's the power dynamics are so uneven? In that sense, we could talk about international law and how it could aid Palestinians, because there was a Soviet Union, there was a differing interests between the US and the Soviet Union. You could work on these contradictions and pave a way for your own, resistance to take form within that sort of medium. But we're talking about a unipolar world. The US reigns supreme. China is catching up. Russia is catching up.
China's on the rise, though, with the increase of renewable energy. Its economy is booming. BRICS, starting to dominate the global economy. So, yeah, the US should watch out. But yeah, please continue.
Yeah, there are these developments, but when you look politically in the region, Russia and China's responses to everything has been very much muted, and I think that's very unusual of them. if you're trying to pave a way for a worldwide, political delinking, economic delinking from the US, your responses, which are muted to everything happening in Gaza, just don't sort of correlate with what you're trying to do. This is my own personal observation. So we still live in a unipolar world. So I don't think international law has failed. I think it has succeeded. When we talk about, Israel weaponizing human rights language, you need to evacuate for your own safety, and we're complying with international law. At this junction, you will receive humanitarian aid, because international law told us you will receive this humanitarian aid, and then you go to the junction and you get shot at. With the recent, ICC case and the ICJ, I think there is potential there, but what's been happening is that is both of them are raising the question of, is international law supposed to be proactive or reactive? And if it's reactive, I'm sorry, it has no use. It's not after like 2 years that you get to decide Benjamin Netanyahu is a war criminal.
It's not after everyone has been slaughtered that you
basically,
all of a sudden decide to take action to stop anything.
Exactly. So these sort of bureaucratic legalese, I don't know what to call it, these processes of international law is what hinders it. But also the US veto, constantly rejecting calls for ceasefires in the Security Council, constantly saying that a ceasefire is not in the interest of the United States, and constantly saying that we don't see a need for a ceasefire, and we just need to see a change in the humanitarian situation in Gaza. And the change in humanitarian situation in Gaza cannot be possible. If I don't see a way to improve the situation in Gaza in a humanitarian sense without a ceasefire. You can put all the aid trucks you want, but if the people are living in tents who take the stuff from the aid trucks, they get bombed at night. Might as well not send the aid trucks to begin with. So what needs to happen right now is ending the aggression, constantly pushing for liberation of Palestine, not just ending the aggression, because in the West there's a ceasefire now, which I agree with, and I also disagree with. The end goal is not ceasefire now, it's liberation. And as long as we don't have that, we're going to see another October 7th, and another October 7th, and another October 7th. Because that's fully within our right as Palestinians to resist. We won't be, just victims for photographs. And this is what the West wants us to be. They want us to be a humanitarian case. They want us to be the trophy victimized demographic. They write some letter to some university. I suffered this and that. Please give me a scholarship. This is the Palestinian they want. And the Palestinian they want won't ever be created like this. We're not just victimhood trophies. We're humans, and if we decide, we want to take destiny into our own hands, we will do it, as we did on October 7th. And I think the West doesn't quite grasp that. Also, within a lot of pro-Palestine circles, they want us to be victims so bad, when we are more than just victims, when we are humans who fully deserve, to be free and liberated, and we're not just a charity case.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think there's definitely a very big focus on the ceasefire in online discussions, and there's not much about the future plan. I mean, even now there's, reports, released saying that it'll take over 50 to 75 years for Gaza to even be rebuilt if the bombing stopped now. And that was at the time of reporting, so even more time has passed since then. But yeah, I mean, in regards to the international law and the veto power, I think the fact that, you know, these great powers have a veto power, it already establishes a hierarchy, saying that they have more power or value than the other nations, you know, the other states. So already that is an unfair system, which is ironic for, you know, the United Nations. But yeah, also just in regards to what you mentioned about humanitarian aid, I definitely want your opinion on um, just something that's happening in Cyprus. So Cyprus is heavily focusing on the Amalthea project, which is this maritime humanitarian aid corridor that apparently has been shipping aid collected by European countries to Palestine. Now, they were shipping this aid through Ashdod, Israel, and, you know, but basically they're trying to paint this image of being a humanitarian hub to where they're providing Palestinians with all this aid, even though in reality we have no information on where that aid goes, what that aid is, because it's also controlled by the Israeli occupation forces. Um, and they kind of use this as a kind of scapegoat of saying we're trying, you know, we're providing aid, when in reality the government's also collaborating with Israel, increasing its ties in energy, business, tourism, in all sectors of the economy. So I want your perspective of this whole humanitarian Amalthea project, the Sea Time corridor, and how realistic that is.
So for me, I think it's very prevalent, for European countries, not just Cyprus, to take photographs and say we're helping Palestinians. Arab regimes also do that. Egypt does that. It takes photographs of Atrox while it sieged Gaza for the past 16, 17 years. Um, uh, Jordan also does it when it exports vegetables to Israel amidst its vegetable shortage. Israel had a vegetable shortage, and Jordan sort of helped them overcome it. And they take photographs of them airdropping supplies to Gaza, which are harmful.
Yeah,
Airdropping supplies like that. Multiple people were martyred by this. The UAE also does it and takes photographs, and we all know the role of the UAE in the region as an outpost of American imperialism that strives to be an Israel. There is something to be said about Saudi Arabia and the UAE striving to be another Israel and maybe a replacement for it in the region, but they can't do it because nobody serves imperial interests more than Israel. So I think that the project of Cyprus sort of also aims to sort of overshadow the fact that Cyprus, has British bases. Multiple articles have been written about this by the Classified UK, for example, about Cyprus's role in basically ferrying supplies, military supplies to Israel. There's been a new Al Jazeera report that basically said most of the supplies that were created by the US-UK air bridge were delivered by the UK. And the most convenient location for it militarily, and it has also been proven that it is the British bases on Cyprus. So I think it's an attempt by the Cypriot government to sort of overshadow this fact and sort of get out of a potential PR nightmare, or maybe a case of a genocide case, abetting genocide, because it has been done to Germany. There is a case against Germany, if we're talking about in the international law sense. There is a case against Germany. So it could be one of those two options. And I think before he got martyred, the Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah also threatened the Cypriot government.
yeah, exactly.
If you engage in this war, we will target you, as you will be considered a party to this war, and we warn you not to be a party to this war. So he was indirectly referencing the fact that it ferries supplies and it acts as a basically an airplane carrier for all intents and purposes. So I think within these projects, the humanitarian sort of masks the overall political picture of everybody is on in the genocide in Gaza. Jordan, Egypt, the United States, most European countries, Cyprus, and they're all trying to mask it in some way or another.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Just to clarify, the British bases, while they're under basically rule of the United Kingdom, so they're British sovereign territory. Technically speaking, Cyprus doesn't have any say in the operations there unless it basically violates Cyprus's sovereignty as a state. But at least our issue is the fact that the government is just complicit in remaining silent and not criticizing military operations performed by the UK government, because they also facilitate the US military at those bases. There's been reporting that they've transported ammunition and even missiles from there. We've also reported on GFC a lot of flight activity happening at Cypriot-controlled facilities. So we even reported the spy flight that usually takes off and lands at RAF Akrotiri. One of them took off from RAF Akrotiri and had landed at Paphos International Airport, Cypriot-controlled facilities. So we know they're at least facilitating their military operations. But we've also we've collected flight data of C-17 Boeing warplanes going from Paphos, US warplane going from Paphos to Israel. That was in, I think, late July. And even this month, we found a US military helicopter going from Larnaca Airport, going off the coast of Paphos, likely to a US warship, because they've also started recently docking at Cyprus as just a temporary stopping point to let the soldiers relax before they, help the Zionist entity with their military operations. And then that same helicopter reappeared going from Rafah in Gaza back to the same point off the coast of Paphos. There's no information on what these US military operations are doing, and the government just claims that it's all for humanitarian purposes. So that's the position that Cyprus is in, unfortunately. But I also want your perspective on there's been some recent cyber attacks targeted at Cypriot facilities, and experts say that this is likely due to our relationship with Israel. So I find this interesting because Cypriot media is only focusing on how Cyprus has thwarted these cyber attacks, but they haven't really focused on the fact that we've been a target for a cyber attack because of our relationship with Israel and how that is problematic even for the future. So I want your perspective on the escalating situation from being threatened as a country by a military force such as Hezbollah, and then facing multiple successive cyber attacks on key infrastructure. And how could things escalate if the relationship continues?
When being threatened like that by Hezbollah and then having these cyber attacks, it points to a very different picture than the Cypriot government is trying to portray. It's not a neutral actor. It's not, it is part and parcel of this genocide happening. And I don't know who did the cyber attacks. We can speculate on who did it, but the fact of the matter is there is a linkage between Israel and Cyprus, military training before October 7th, and just overall, facilitating US and UK warplanes and Navy vessels. So in that sense, Cyprus can be truly a neutral country in this. And as a Palestinian, I don't want to say, we support Hamas. Just be neutral, at least. It can truly be neutral if it says any UK or US flight that goes over our airspace violates our sovereignty, and maybe call for an evacuation of British bases since, they're on your land. But that's a far-fetched idea, but at least, say to the UK that these activities are amounting to, abetting genocide. Have a diplomatic tussle with the UK, at least, if you want to be truly neutral. But otherwise, you're just complicit. I don't expect the Cypriot government to say, we support the axis of resistance. I don't expect them to say Israel needs to pull out of Gaza or we will launch ballistic missiles at them. The bar isn't that high for me as a Palestinian. Just exercise your neutrality truly without any double standards, and that's completely fine for me. But otherwise, this attempt at abetting genocide and appearing neutral will eventually, fall flat on its face, and everybody will see Cyprus, if not already, as truly a perpetrator of a genocide alongside Israel, alongside the UK, the US, Germany.
Yeah, and unfortunately, our government's key focus is increasing military ties with the US and the UK. So, yeah, no luck trying to convince this current administration that increasing military ties with states supporting a genocide is probably not a good idea. But yeah, that's why we're here, trying to at least inform people of what's going on. So I'd like to move on to the next question, and it has to do with we were discussing Smotrich before, and how basically he has, I guess, openly called for even more settlements in Gaza and the West Bank. And I want your view of how basically you can have, Minister of Finance of Israel just openly say these things, and look at how the violence is increasing in the West Bank and in Palestine, and how the international community can just be silent when not just Smotrich, but a lot of other Israeli officials are just openly saying very genocidal statements and phrasing. So I want your perspective of why is this, deafening ear only when Israeli officials speak?
It's because I think the speech of Germany's foreign minister, that Israel's security is of Germany's security. In that sense, it's the most blunt, it's the most honest, but also blunt sort of admission that the US, that Israel is just a US European base. So it's not, when people point out to the double standards of the international community, I think they're pretty much in line with their own principles. I think their principles are genocide. Their principles are wealth extraction, draining, surplus labor, through wars, through genocide, through invasions, and I don't see, the hypocrisy of the international community, and even then, I don't see I don't see them as silent. Sure, they're silent on these statements, but would you say something to a friend, who says something controversial, but you agree with them? No, that's what it amounts to, basically. They want us to be killed. They want us to be colonized, and no amount of saying the U.S. Imposed an individual sanctions list on some settler leaders in the West Bank, but what people fail to recognize, some people lauded the U.S. for this. Thank God the U.S. is here to save Palestinians. But what those people fail to consider is that the act of settlement is not an individual endeavor. They settle. You're not decapitating the settler movement in the West Bank just because XYZ bank refuses to cooperate with them.
Yeah.
So in that sense, there has been some action on part of the West, but that has been just a PR move. And what we have seen is in the past year is a rapid expansion of settlement. Nobody is going to stop it except Palestinians, because we're always at the forefront of fighting for this type of stuff alone. Us and the people of Lebanon, the people of the region, we're the only people sort of fighting against these plans. But otherwise, I don't see silence. I don't see hypocrisy. I see abetting a genocide. I see them being perfectly in line with their civilizing mission. Because Netanyahu, in a speech, said that Israel and Europe share a civilizing mission, and if we in that context, it will become clear why, Germany, shut down a resistance UAV as Germany as part of a UNIFIL force that is supposed to be neutral, but the German vessel shot the Hezbollah UAV that is defending Lebanon basically, and shot it down. When any Israeli warplane wouldn't be shot down by UNIFIL force because it's supposed to be neutral, it's supposed to be just guarding, not opening live ammunition or anything. We see why Germany does this. We see why the US and the UK do this, because for them, Israel is an immovable aircraft carrier in the literal sense, because they can't fight wars on the ground.
That's
They're
clearly
very bad at it. Very bad at it. They are very much bad at it. The only thing they know is to bomb from the sky, and to cause massive amounts of destruction. When after they bomb, you flatten an entire neighborhood and go in with your tanks and infantry, and you consider it a win. I don't see how it's a win. Israel is faced with a strategic dilemma that there is still resistance in Gaza even after they killed Sinwar. There is still resistance in Lebanon, and the blows that have been dealt to Hezbollah over the past 2 months, it would be enough to bring down an entire state on its knees, begging for a ceasefire. Hezbollah has not begged for a single ceasefire. The pager attacks, which are terrorist attacks, targeting the fighters. People say, oh, they also target civilians, but also the fighters are just as human as any human is. Targeting fighters, targeting medical personnel, targeting people in civil institutions related to Hezbollah, because Hezbollah is not only a military force, but it's also a social movement of sorts. And it has social institutions, and it has a big role in Lebanese society. So all of these people were targeted. And with the assassination of several of its leaders, including Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, any force in the world would just be completely immobilized. Hezbollah has displayed an amazing capability of just fighting back despite all the losses. And I think when history about this entire war will be written down, Hezbollah will emerge as one of the greatest organizational feats in history. Because organizationally it doesn't make sense how they recovered, but they did. So in circling back to everything, I think that the forces that are truly fighting for humanity and for an actual civilization that's based on ethics, that's based on respect, mutual respect, actual sovereignty, actual state building, is the axis of resistance. It is Hezbollah, it is Hamas, it is Yemen, it is Iran. And when people attempt to sort of obfuscate this by saying, well, they're regressive, they're reactionary. In the current battle, they are not. They are very much progressive. They are certainly more progressive than a lot of Marxists. And most Marxist critiques of Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran only amount to nitpickings. When we consider the concept of liberation theology, I think it will become clearer what I mean by the fact that they're progressive. It's very different, liberation theology from its manifestation in Latin America to its manifestation in the Arab world, but it still exists. And, the people fighting for humanity, literally for humanity, because everything that was done in Gaza and is being done will be replicated on a worldwide scale, to every endangered demographic around the world. And people fail to recognize that. But it's going to happen, if nobody stops Israel.
Unfortunately, the state with the most influence on Israel, the US, is definitely not, doesn't have the intention to do so. And whether you're, with elections coming up, whether you're voting for the Democratic Party or the Republican, it doesn't seem to make a difference on their foreign policy stance. So that's why definitely I've seen a lot of people kind of push the third party candidate, Jill Stein, which I think would definitely be a step forward into having actual social change within the US system. But I do find your perspective very interesting and when speaking about the resistance axes, because my perspective is, while people may complain about the resistance axes methods, if you look at it holistically, we can't really begin to negotiate unless the one country that's bombing the other 5 countries stops. So when you have a state that is first answer is violence, then how can you have Hezbollah not defend against an invasion, and a ground invasion, by the way, that they use Cypriot soil to train on, funnily enough. So people just completely forget the fact that since 2017, since the previous administration, they've had exercises in Rhodos, in Cypriot mountains, that it has very similar geography to southern Lebanon, and they've basically used that to train for fighting against Hezbollah. So they seem to always forget this perspective when they talk about the Estia plan and how they're helping people in Lebanon evacuate. So I think that's definitely something they want to try keep hidden from the general public as much as they can, the fact that they've helped with the military activities going on.
Yeah, there's a saying in Arabic that basically says, you kill a person and you walk in their funeral. And I think this is what, Cyprus did with regards to Lebanon. So
That's a great analogy.
yeah, I mean, nothing, it also applies to the US when they claim we're sending a stimulus package to the Palestinians, and like, you're the one killing us. Those are your bombs.
Yeah.
So this sort of attempt at polishing their bad PR image with really symbolic gestures, with really gestures that don't translate to anything on the ground, I think they are funny, and I think they embody that saying perfectly. Like, they are literally killing us and walking in our funeral and expressing sympathies and deep regrets.
Yeah. Now that we've gone on to talking about more geopolitics, I want to kind of focus back in on the West Bank. So I definitely wanted to get your perspective on this, because while the Good Shepherd Collective does amazing work in terms of data collection of Israel's war crimes, and it's definitely important being able to visualize statistically what's happening and the accumulation of destruction, I think it's also important to talk about the stories of individual Palestinians. And I want to get your perspective, whether your own personal experience or the experience of people around you. If you could just kind of talk us through the daily life of a Palestinian living in the West Bank, whether that's going to the grocery store, whether that's trying to go to school, university, trying to just meet up with friends, just the average thing that we do every day and we don't think of. And I want to bring your perspective to the people watching, because I think it's important to remember that all these numbers, all these people, they have lives and they have families and people that care for them.
So I can speak about myself and like my journey to college every day, basically. I wake up at 5 a.m. I go at 6. I arrived to class probably late, at either like 9:30 to 10:30, depends also on the traffic situation. In a lot of areas, congestion is a big problem, and this congestion is also Israeli caused. They're trapping people in enclaves. They're not that in enclaves that are not ruled by the PA or them. So there's no development going into this enclave. Um, and basically it exists in a bureaucratic and legal limbo where it's not Israel's not controlling it, neither the PA, administratively. And on my way, I passed through, at the very least, 4 to 5 checkpoints.
Hmm.
4 to 5 checkpoints on the way. Sometimes, when I leave my hometown, I wait for like an hour and a half just at the checkpoint so they can just let us in. Sometimes they
Hmm.
check ID, sometimes they check our phone. So if you have Telegram on your phone, um, you might get tortured, you might get hit by them, because they assume you're you know, you follow resistance channels on Telegram, for example. If you have anything remotely suspicious on your phone, they will hit you. I think on the day of October 7th, they thankfully I wasn't out. They asked people basically, what day is this? And if you say I don't know, or if you say October 7th, you will get hit. So both of them, on the day that Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was martyred, they distributed sweets on the checkpoints. And if you don't take, what they're distributing, the chocolate, whatever, you will get hit, and probably arrested. So we're dealing with a very sadistic, with a very sadistic army, with a very sadistic settler mindset. And when people tell me, lots of, I don't want to say lots of leftists, but there's a portion of them that we must work with the Israeli working class, and I'm like, the Israeli working class is what is the problem.
Yeah.
Do you think the soldier on the checkpoint is not part of some working class somewhere? Before their quote unquote duty or afterwards. So when you ignore material conditions, and when you speak on the abstract idealist terms, Israeli working class, what does being part of the Israeli working class entail? It entails living on stolen land. It entails even the little, you know, value you produce is made from Palestinians. So your very existence is based on wasting Palestinian lives. And there's this whole concept of waste. I recommend Ali Qadri. He's a very excellent Lebanese Arab writer. There's a book called The Unmaking of Arab Socialism. Very, very good book. He talks about, U.S.-Israeli attempts to stifle Arab development, stifle political development, military development through the concept of neoliberalism, military interventions, wars, etc. And he coined the concept of waste. And our lives and my life as a Palestinian is wasted through checkpoints, because I can go to college in less than 2 hours, but I can't because there are checkpoints. So I'm losing time where I could be as a human being productive. So my time, my very physical existence is being wasted on the checkpoint. And there's something to be said about that. And there's something to be said about um, treating Palestinians as expedient in a way, that they're allowed to just waste our lives with checkpoints. They're allowed to kill us, maim us, hit us on a checkpoint if we answer incorrectly a question. They're allowed to do all of this, and we're supposed to be the ones that, become reasonable on the negotiating table. This is even if we discuss the possibility of negotiating anymore. For me, there are no negotiations anymore. But even if we accept that possibility, we have endured what I think amounts to a very slow form of violence that will lead to genocide in the West Bank for the past, 57, 58 years. If we don't count Jordanian rule, which I also, in my own point of view, I also count it as being part and parcel of Israeli plans. When the border was drawn in the West Bank, it was agreed upon, before the 1948 war. So it was all very much part of a plan, an Israeli, American, British plan to how to demarcate the West Bank and how to control it in tandem with Jordan. But there's something to be said about the fact that when I go to college, it requires great amount of effort. I go to class, I'm already tired for the day. And it's just my, 9:30 a.m. class. It's not even, I'm not supposed to be tired on my 9:30 a.m. class, but that since I wake up at 5 and I spend like 4 to 5, sometimes 6 hours in transport, it becomes the whole day becomes just a blur. I don't do anything for the day because I'm just tired. So when you boil it down to concrete terms, the entire day is wasted for just something that could be done in 2 hours, aka traveling to university. So this is my own personal experience. Pre-October 7th, there were closures like this, there were checkpoints like this, but it didn't take this much time. It didn't take this much effort to get to do anything that you want outside of your hometown. But after October 7th, it's been oddly reminiscent, as people, who grew up in the Second Intifada, oddly reminiscent of the Second Intifada days.
Yeah. Yeah, the checkpoint situation I've heard from other people as well is just abysmal in terms of the time spent. And yeah, I find it also kind of disgusting in a sense that they were, celebrating the death of, I think you mentioned Nasrallah, by giving out sweets at the checkpoints and then hitting you if you didn't accept it. So I think that's, just another example of the amount of dehumanization that Palestinians feel at the checkpoint. But thank you. Must have been, it must have been a difficult journey just to take the dedication to go every day to college or university. Looking at it from my perspective, it's I'm privileged. It seems so easy, and that's why I wanted to bring this perspective on the reality on the ground and how people who are living there are living through these conditions and are not just a statistic, not just a number. So thank you again, Ameed, for all your time, and we really appreciate your perspective, both on the work that the Good Shepherd Collective has done and is continuing to do, and also for speaking about your experience. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Matthew, for having me, and I'm glad to be here and also honored. So thank you so much.
Thank you, and we'll definitely speak again soon.
We will.